Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our School of Public Affairs First Friday December event. Paul Teske, I'm the Dean of the school, and we're delighted that you're joining us for this lunch hour Zoom. As you know, the topic today is our Center on Domestic Violence, the legacy of Barbara Paradiso, who I think many of you know passed away in late July, very suddenly and shockingly, and we're still kind of dealing with the personal aspects of that, as is obviously Barb's family, her partner Kim Smith, and children Isabel and John, who will watch this video, can't be here now, but we want to wish them all the best and all of our sympathy and condolences 4 months since Barb's passing. Before we start, I want to thank Emma Martz at School of Public Affairs, who does all the logistics on this, and Tula Wellbrook. And also Jane Hansberry, whose name you see there, who really organized the panel and put a lot of this together for us. So, and others, I'm sure. But we have a fabulous panel here, and people that have been very connected to the center, to Barb, and to the important work on domestic violence that has been done at the center and at the school now for more than 20 years. So I'll introduce the panel fairly briefly, and then we'll get started with some comments and questions. But at the same time, please feel free to keep looking at the chat and the Q&A. We'll get to your questions and answers later in the hour. But also, if you have thoughts, memories, ideas to share in the chat with everyone really about the center and your own relationship with Barb and the work that's been done, please feel free to do that. So our panel, 5 fabulous people. First, Monica Bies, who is the Interim Director of our Center on Domestic Violence. Monica has a background in social work and lots of work in schools and with youth. She currently does a lot of work on a grant with the End Violence Grant, which is work in K-12 schools around domestic violence and the children that are associated with that. So we're glad that Monica is here. We're also fortunate to have Ruth Glenn she's the president and CEO of the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. She graduated from this program with an MPA in 2003 and the concentration in domestic violence. She worked for many years in Colorado on these issues, is now nationally prominent, and some of you may have seen Ruth a little over a year ago at the Democratic National Convention, where she was a major featured speaker on domestic violence issues. So we're thrilled to have Ruth joining us today. Professor Angela Gover is with us. Angela is an amazing scholar who's won numerous awards, most of her work as a criminologist in victimology and domestic violence in particular. She's published numerous journal articles, been quoted in lots of places about her work. Most recently, she wrote a paper on hate crimes aimed towards Asian Americans during the COVID pandemic. They just kind of went viral and got a lot of attention all over the country and a lot of citations, as it obviously hit on a very important topic. So Angela, thank you for being here. And Shannon Harper, who also was a student in the domestic violence concentration. She earned her MPA in 2011. She then went on to get a PhD at the University of Illinois, Chicago, and is now an assistant professor at Iowa State, which I think you can see in her background with those beautiful campus buildings. Shannon will talk about her relationship to the program and her career, and she's continued to do amazing academic work in this area. And then last but not least, Rita Smith, who's worked in this area for decades and worked with Barb very closely on a range of issues. She's got an incredible background on these issues in practice, in research, and in connecting all of those things. She continues the work as a consultant, including to the National Football League and other organizations these days. So those are very brief. I could spend the whole hour with these folks' background, but we want to get to the content. So what we're going to do is start with some initial comments about your relationship to the center and this work and Barb, and then we'll ask some more specific questions before we get to the audience questions. So we'll start with Rita. If you could talk a little bit about how you were involved with the center, how it changed over time, and the work that Barb has done and how important that is around the country.
Thank you, Paul. First, I'd really like to to thank all of you for coming to honor the legacy that Barbara Paradiso gave us over the course of nearly 40 years in this work. I met her sometime in the very early 80s when we were both advocates in local domestic violence programs, and we would go to state coalition meetings, and that's where I met Barb. And we just formed a very strong connection, not just in the way that we saw the work, but as friends. And so for nearly 40 years, I worked with her in a variety of ways. We were both directors of local programs at the same time. And then I went to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and Barb left Boulder Safe House and went to work with Doris Buffett as she created the Sunshine Lady Foundation. And the Sunshine Lady Foundation is the idea that gave us life at the Center on Domestic Violence. Barb and I were helping her develop her grant programs, and one of the things we asked her to consider was creating an opportunity within a graduate degree program that would focus on domestic violence and sexual assault, creating leaders who were competent, capable, very well educated, but also understood the intersectionality of oppressions and how that led to violence and how that impacted violence, how the intersectionality of those oppressions actually fed the violence. Because that's something that survivors taught both Barb and I as we worked in this field. You can't do this work if you don't address racism and sexism and homophobia. You can't do it well. You can provide great services, but you can't do social change that actually shifts the culture. And so Doris agreed to fund a graduate program like that with that focus on DV and sexual assault. And so the initial idea was another university. That university didn't actually manage to get the work going. But University of Colorado Denver School of Public Affairs had the vision. They had the commitment. They wanted this program. And so the Center on Domestic Violence was created in conjunction with the School on Public Affairs, 2 graduate programs, both in criminal justice and in public affairs, master's degree programs that also had the intersectionality foundation that's critical to this work. It is a gift that will continue to give well beyond any of our lifetimes. It's something that Barb helped create that is making a difference everywhere. As you see on the panel, there are 2 amazing students who came through that program, both Ruth and Shannon, who are doing culture-changing work right now because of the education they got. And I want you all to understand that this program does not exist anywhere else in the country. This is a unique, visionary program that exists at UC Denver School of Public Affairs. There are other great MPA programs, absolutely, in the United States. There is not one that has this kind of foundational understanding, developing leaders who can do amazing social change work in their communities. So I just wanted to leave you all with that, knowing that this legacy is something that's powerful, and that I am personally committed to making sure it continues in some way, and that it grows and thrives and keeps filling the spots at leadership positions all over this country, so that we can actually reduce violence in our communities. Because I think that's what all our goal is doing this work. And I'm just very happy that you're all here helping us honor this, and that you provide your support and commitment to helping us keep it going. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Rita, for getting us going with those comments. Angela, you've been an academic partner to the center. You teach classes in this area. How have you seen it evolve and make an impact?
I've been a faculty member here at the School of Public Affairs for 15 of the 20 years that the center has been here. And Barb Paradiso is very much responsible for why I am sitting here today. 16 years ago, I was a faculty member at the University of Florida when UCD advertised for a position for a faculty member with expertise in domestic violence. And Barb was the chair of the search committee. Barb was the very first person I met when I arrived in Denver for my interview. After I had my interview and soaked up everything I learned about the center, I was completely mesmerized by everything Barb was doing here at this university. Nothing like it existed at any other university at that time, and still doesn't, even today. I couldn't believe that a graduate program for students existed, for students who were devoting their lives to the field of domestic violence. This was one of a kind graduate program. I really thought it was almost too good to be true. And on top of that, it was located in the beautiful state of Colorado, the state that I had always wanted to settle down in and live forever. The Center on Domestic Violence is certainly something that changed my life forever. And if you're an alum attending this event today, it is surely something that has changed your life too. And if you're a prospective student attending this event today, keep an open mind while you're listening today. It is something that could change your life too. I started teaching in my first domestic violence intensive in August of 2006. Barb was out on family leave. She had just had John, her second child. My first intensive was a whirlwind. I was used to teaching traditional criminology and criminal justice graduate students, and the students that I had here were anything but traditional. Barb was anything but traditional. Now I had an entire classroom of empowered, passionate people who were all in the room for a singular vital reason: to make a difference in this world for victims of gendered violence. What I was doing there that day made a difference to them, and that made a difference to me. So I am so thankful to Barb for creating so many unique teaching opportunities for me. I have most definitely benefited from the teaching opportunities that and relationships that have been created through the Center on Domestic Violence. Moving forward, I will carry Barb's vision as the director of the concentration for gender-based violence as we all work together to end violence in our communities.
Thanks so much, Angela. And as you'll see, Barb's passing was, of course, very sudden and very shocking. And but we had the folks on this panel and others step up to do an intensive program in August, and we're planning another one in January, and we're keeping the grant work going. And people like the folks on this panel have been very helpful and instrumental indeed in continuing this work in Barb's memory and for its own sake. So next, I'd like to ask Ruth a little bit about how being a graduate of the program and being involved with it has affected your work over time. Oh, also muted. Okay.
I always forget to unmute. So first of all, as you stated earlier, Paul, for Barb's family, I just want to send our warmth and hugs and whatever else it is they need. And certainly even to Rita, who has been very, very close with Barb over the years. It's like everyone else has stated, it was quite surprising, shocking, and of course dredged up many memories of my interactions with Barb. So I'll talk really quickly about how I met Barb, and then certainly talk about how Barb has influenced the work going forward. In 1994, I had been 2 years safe from domestic violence myself. And I had been volunteering at what was then known as the Colorado Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and was serving on the Survivors Task Force. And I had to represent the Survivors Task Force on a board meeting. And the first person I met was Barbara Paradiso. So I've known Barb I was just calculating it. You probably saw me calculating over 25 years, which is quite amazing because our history with each other has often intersected in the work of domestic violence here in Colorado, and even at the national level of what we've been doing now. I saw Barb about a week before her unfortunate and untimely passing at another dear colleague's funeral, memorial service. And I don't want to tear up, but Barb and I have, like I said, we didn't see each other very frequently, But it was the one time that Barb actually gave me a really, really good hug. And we were both there mourning someone else. It was Brooke Ely Milan, who was also an alum of the program. And really kind of doing the sister thing around Brooke's passing. And then, of course, over the years, Barbara and I have certainly crossed paths many times on both fronts. And I always felt like, particularly what Rita said about social change, she was always the barometer from my perspective, not just as a professional, but also personally, among some others here in Colorado, about social change being the catalyst for making sure that we move forward in what we can do to end domestic violence. So I will miss her. The National Coalition Against Domestic Violence will miss her. And again, just sending out my personal warm hugs and the NCADB's warm hugs to all those that knew her, and particularly her family. So thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Ruth. Next, let's go to Shannon, who also a graduate of the program, and kind of how that has shaped your career and your life.
Sure. Thank you very much for inviting me, first off. I'm both happy and honored to be here, especially to remember my esteemed mentor and friend, Barbara Paradiso, lovingly referred to as Barb. My name is Shannon Harper, as Dr. Teskey mentioned, and I was a public administration master's student in the School of Public Affairs, as well as a member of cohort 10. So each person who goes through the program gets assigned to a cohort, which is wonderful. But I was a member of cohort 10 within Barb's program on domestic violence. And this was from 2009 to 2011. So Barb was at the forefront of every aspect of my 2-year program. I learned from her not only as a domestic violence expert, but also as a mentor and friend. She was constantly available for her students. Upon applying for the concentration and the MPA degree, Barb reached out to me directly to welcome me and explain how the program would provide a pathway through which I could really devote my life to domestic violence education. And she was right. She did provide that pathway, and I am here where I am today thanks to her. She was beautifully warm, engaging, brilliant, and passionate about the program, and honestly made me fall in love with domestic violence advocacy. I'm very grateful to her. Within my cohort, she helped to build a network of individuals with similar but differing domestic violence interests and experience, so we could both grow our knowledge and learn from each other. I have many dear friends from my cohort, way back when, even today, and we call ourselves the Sisters of the Traveling Sage. So we meet up every month by Zoom, or try to, and go to vacation spots across the country every few years. So she built these meaningful relationships within each cohort and took part in almost every aspect of the program. So she was always visible and always there to engage with the lecturers and the seminars to make them more enriching and add her expertise. And her passion for the work instilled in us the profound importance of domestic violence advocacy and education worldwide. So now I'm an assistant professor here at Iowa State University, and my research specializes in domestic violence and intimate partner homicide among women of color. And I owe my career to her, quite honestly. And my 2 years in the program were honestly the best of my life. So thanks, Barb.
Thank you, Shannon. I know some of us are cheering up. It's a difficult, but also important event to remember Barb's impact on everyone, and still pretty close to her passing. So thank you. Monica, in last of the initial comments, you've been with the center for several years working on the End Violence K-12 school project and other things. And then, we're graciously jumped into the interim director role after Barb's passing and kind of holding things together for us, which we really appreciate. And so look forward to some comments on your what you've seen with the center and in the past and looking forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's wonderful having everyone here because in this panel are all of the supporters who really embraced our staff, myself and our 2 full-time staff and our interns, to really help us to keep Barb's work going, to keep this legacy going, to pay attention to the program on gender-based violence. We had about 2 weeks to pull it off, and it was an honor to her. Many people in this room were there, and it was, I think, a great tribute to her and what she brought, that we were all able to step in and sort of emulate some of the things that she brought. And it was very powerful, and I think a good experience for the students. The center itself, we are all continuing our grant-funded work, which is national level training and technical assistance in rural communities. And right now, a lot of grant-funded work in the area of youth in K-12 schools. So we know that there's a lot of gaps in that work with youth that have experienced or been exposed to violence. And so in order to create and maintain safe educational environments for youth, the End Violence works with schools and districts, local and state entities towards more meaningful, effective, and trauma-informed response to youth disclosures. It's a different world with youth where they are not necessarily always reaching out to say, I need this help and now, but something happens to them and the adults pull the systems in and things go awry. So we want to make sure that our responses give them voice and give them choice in how things move forward and in how they create their story moving forward. So that work, a lot of it, we are trying to work on a larger level with response, and we are also providing in schools training for staff, helping them to recognize and identify students in need, and then some direct services to students and families.
Awesome. Thank you, Monica. So after those initial statements, we're going to dive in a little deeper with some questions. But again, I'd encourage the audience members to put some questions or comments you may have in the Q&A or the chat, and we'll get to those. Let's start with Shannon. As a student, you've talked a little bit about this, but what were your deciding factors to pursue this concentration? And what would you tell current or future students about why they should be part of it and what they will learn?
Let me unmute here. Thank you for the question. Yes, definitely. One of the primary reasons I chose to attend UC Denver and enroll as an MPA student was because of Barb's innovative domestic violence program. So as was mentioned before, nothing existed like it elsewhere in the country. I had been really passionate about helping survivors of violence and addressing the injustice that they encountered in the criminal justice system for years in a volunteer capacity. But I wanted a place to actually plant that passion and that experience of mine in a way that I could devote my life to it and actually, in all practical considerations, live well financially. So during this time in my life, I was floundering career-wise as I had a degree in communications and was working in, of all things, design, build, proposal management, and I really didn't like that work. And I was also volunteering at the same time. So I desperately wanted to work professionally in domestic violence advocacy or education, yet didn't know how to realize that goal professionally. So the PGV program today, what it's referred to, helped to connect my passions to real career opportunities and provided me with the direction I needed to truly envision myself as a survivor-focused domestic violence scholar and advocate for the rest of my life. It provided not only classes led by domestic violence scholars and experts, but specialized subject matter specific hands-on learning opportunities with survivors such as Brenda Klubine, who was incarcerated for decades for killing her terroristic, abusive husband because she was not allowed to present evidence of domestic violence at trial. And that presentation that Brenda gave was really my entire research focus at the moment. So it just blew my mind, quite honestly speaking, about this injustice. So every day in the 2-year program, provided me an exciting seminar or opportunity to learn about DV complexities and made it feel empirical and grounded for me. And I'm thankful to Barb for the program for that reason. And my experience was wonderful. And what I would tell students, just to close out, is if you're not interested in being a professional domestic violence advocate or practitioner, that's okay. This program will change your life, and it'll open the scope in terms of what's happening that you don't hear about also so often, and how you can help others in your community who may be suffering.
Terrific. Thank you, Shannon. Lots of good comments in the chat, which we appreciate. We will be getting to some broader domestic violence movement kinds of issues, and want to just connect the center and Barb's work to that is with the questions we have. And the next question is for Ruth, and you've long been a leader in this field, and you've run into a lot of other leaders. You mentioned that a little bit in your earlier comment. And what are the skills and knowledge and other elements that leaders in domestic violence today need? And do you feel like our program is hitting on a lot of those things? And if so, great. And if not, are there some additional things that we should be paying more attention to? So thanks, Ruth.
Thank you. What I would like to also comment while I'm thinking about it, I was one of the students in the very early, I believe I was in cohort 3, if I'm not mistaken. So the evolution of the program, and not only Barb's contribution to that, but the evolution of the program just speaks to how we need to be innovative and thinking ahead about how we do things in addressing gender-based violence. I think that having worked in a government agency for 28 years and then moving to a nonprofit, I don't believe, quite frankly, that I would have been as effective without having the concentration in DV. What I mean is, no matter what you think you have to be willing to hear everything about the root causes and the foundation of domestic violence. What causes domestic violence? What are the dynamics of domestic violence? And then being willing to hear all of the intersecting and other issues that are either risk factors or contributing factors or other things that people are experiencing that contribute or that allow for domestic violence to continue. I think entering any kind of work like this, and I appreciate Shannon's remarks in particular, but any kind of work like this, you do have to have a certain passion, and you have to be willing to be open. I think the program went a long way in doing that. There were many times that we had lecturers that I didn't either connect with what they were saying but I find years and years and years later that I can certainly go back to those conversations or the work that we did, for instance, in leadership and ethics. Who thought I would need that? Or, the dynamics of domestic violence as offered by Lydia Walker, and really getting down to the grassroots level about that particular subject. So the public administration with the concentration at that time in domestic violence really also helped me transfer some of the skills that I had learned in, quite frankly, public administration over to a nonprofit sector. And I can't tell you how many times I recall in either the subject matters that we talked about or classroom work that we did that has really helped me, and I'm hoping influencing other folks that I talk to in the world of domestic violence in the national field of work. I will also remark, as Shannon did, I have long-lasting friends from that time in 2003 when we graduated together. And not all of them have continued on in the work of domestic violence, but I guarantee you that we commiserate about the things we either learned and what do we do now in this age and time from 2003 about X, Y, or Z. And so Barb also facilitated the ability to have that cohort follow you throughout the time that you're either working in this field or not. So.
Great. Thank you, Ruth. Very inspiring. I also, it may or may not come up in some of the questions, but I know, from my own work with the center, Barb helped bring federal money to our campus to create what is now the Phoenix Center on campus, which serves the domestic violence and interpersonal gender violence concerns of students on all three campuses, which is something like 40,000 students here in the area higher education center at Metro State and Community College of Denver, as well as CU Denver. So that's another legacy of Barb's work that got taken up and transferred to the campus and to the community. That's had a huge impact. So Rita, moving to you and your vast experience in this field and your work with Barb, we look back, and I know in 1994, the Violence Against Women Act was kind of a major, a very major piece of legislation, symbolically as well as practically. And our current president was pretty involved in that. If you were talking to Congress about funding for this issue, and you probably do actually, but what would you tell them about this work and about what the center does and about why it's important to keep funding it at the federal level?
I think, Paul, what I would say to them is that everybody talks about wanting their communities to be safer, and that's what all our goals are. And what I would like people who have the power to make change understand is that if we reduce domestic violence and sexual assault, if we effectively respond to it, we will all be safer. You spend the money there and you reduce the cost of law enforcement, of mental health, of healthcare issues. And unfortunately, 50 to 60% of the mass murders in this country are domestic violence related. All of us are impacted by the violence that does not get contained appropriately. And so holding abusers accountable and providing effective services and support for ongoing recovery and thriving for survivors has a price tag, but there's a much, much larger price tag that we have been paying for far too long for not responding effectively to these issues, to only piecemealing, trying to find responses. So what I would say is open up those purse strings, because it's going to make things better for everybody if we effectively fund the work and we effectively fund the education and leadership development for the people who do this work every day.
Thank you. Very well said. Moving back to Angela, and as Rita was saying, one of the reasons we have this center here is in a graduate program, two graduate programs, actually, the MPA and the Masters in Criminal Justice. And part of that is to connect the teaching and the leadership training to the research. And I know you've been thinking about the curriculum and how it's evolved and how it might look in the future. So how do you think about the academic connection to the work that we're talking about?
Great question, Paul. So the academic programs offered by the center are unique, one-of-a-kind programs, just like Rita said. Our programs prepare students to be current and future leaders and to be catalysts for change in the nonprofit and public sectors. The program's curriculum blends public policy, organizational management, social justice work, and gender-based violence education in really powerful and dynamic ways. The curriculum is specifically designed for strong leaders who are dedicated to ending violence in our culture. And so the gender-based violence concentration is offered as a concentration within two master's degree programs. We offer the Master of Public Administration and the Master of Criminal Justice degree. And students can also have the option of pursuing a joint master's degree in public administration and criminal justice. We also offer the certificate program in gender-based violence, and that is particularly appealing for advocates and professionals who wish to broaden their knowledge in sexual and domestic violence studies. Both the concentration and the certificate program consists of 4 courses, and that is 12 credits. The concentration and curriculum has a multidisciplinary focus, and that is because the dynamics of gender-based violence are complicated and deeply rooted in our beliefs in society. And for that reason, no specific discipline has the answers for bringing violence to an end. And also, Shannon talked about this a little bit, but the program is based in a cohort intensive model. So students take their courses during an intensive hybrid format setting. That means that students come to Denver twice a year and they stay all together in one hotel. And they take their courses for 5 days at a time, 8 hours a day, and they complete the rest of their courses online. And this intensive format promotes relationship building among the students and enhanced learning opportunities. And this is really a fantastic thing that I really enjoy about working with the Center on Domestic Violence in the School of Public Affairs.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Angela. I continue to see questions or comments in the chat. You're chatting with each other, which is fabulous. If you have specific questions, please put them in the Q&A. But I have some more, and we'll continue the conversation. I want to move to Monica. As Angela mentioned, that in the cohort, 5 days, we also often do a community education program that reaches beyond the students, as well as some other events during the year. And there have been some really interesting ones in the last year or so. And can you talk a little bit about that and what the goal is of connecting that to other activities at the center?
Yes, sure. Like you said, the community education series happens twice a year, and it does happen during that week-long intensive in August and again in January. And, over many years, I think the community ed series has brought the lived experience of survivors and scholars and advocates whose combined work is to bring on larger social and systemic change to end gender-based violence. And I remember when I first joined the center and attended my first community education series, it was a presentation on human trafficking by Mary Landerholm, who, when she came to Denver, was in a class, I believe at MSU, learning about human trafficking, when she realized that she was hearing about her own life and her story as a survivor of human trafficking. So Mary worked in the statewide nonprofit, the Laboratory to Combat Human Trafficking. She was part of the task force, the Colorado Human Trafficking Council here in Colorado. And she consulted on training for the Human Trafficking Training and Technical Assistance Center and the Office of Victims of Crimes in Washington. But what most stood out to me is Mary's commitment to actively empowering other survivors to share their stories and their expertise in combating a crime that they know better than anyone else. And so that was very powerful to me coming into the center and the community ed series and truly bringing in the community. We've hosted renowned scholar Jacqueline Campbell, who is a professor at Johns Hopkins University School of Nursing, whose major area of research is violence against women and the associated physical and mental outcomes, including intimate partner homicide and traumatic brain injury. Rachel Ramirez, the founder and director of the Center of Partner-Inflicted Brain Injury of the Ohio Domestic Violence Network. And then we've have leaders, one of whom I see was in the chat, like Tanya Lovelace, of Lovelace Consulting, who is the former CEO of the Women of Color Network in Washington, D.C., whose mission is to eliminate violence against all women against all women and their communities by centralizing the voices, wellness, and leadership of women of color in the movement. More recently, we have had Monica Kant and Shirley Lau from the Asian American Pacific Islander Institute in California, and New Min Lee from the Asian Pacific Development Center locally here in Denver to talk about issues specific to their communities around engagement and how they provide all kinds of supports to ensure the safety, well-being, and progress of their communities. And I guess another one that stands out to me, and it's somebody who has come up again recently, one of our past speakers and an ongoing connection, is Lieutenant Mark Wynn, who is an expert in expanding knowledge and response to survivors in the area of criminal justice and law enforcement. He was a 21-year member of the Nashville Metropolitan Police Department. He served as lieutenant to the Domestic Violence Division, but his expertise in law enforcement is augmented just by his values, his personal experiences, his respect for the work of advocates, and that really all people have to come together to make this change. So I think that, the Community Ed series also makes me think of Barb and makes me think of the intensive and makes me think of what a community is built in that program on gender-based violence, and how as a center we expand out into the community with our national and local work. And then with the Community Ed series, participants I think have really appreciated the space where they can interact in an environment. The Community Ed series are usually maybe up 30 to 50 people. And so it's a little bit more intimate. And there's people working in all different professions that are coming together that share the same goals and really have an opportunity to collaborate. And I think that's been one of the really beautiful outcomes of the Community Ed series.
Thank you, Monica. Do we have one planned for January?
We are in the process right now.
Okay.
The topic that we are looking at and trying to we are making connections, but we're in the process of, is around historical and generational trauma. The course for the program on gender-based violence is the psychology of interpersonal violence, and we thought that that would be a nice match to what students are learning in the coming intensive.
Thank you. And there's a question in the chat, Monica, about some of the national impact, and maybe others could jump in here too. I know Barb did a technical assistance, and some of your projects are, a little bit beyond Colorado. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I can, and I will also ask that Rita and Angela jump in here. So the national technical assistance work, currently, our grant is to support rural communities in developing coordinated community response. So when looking at a rural community, their needs may be different. Lots of people know each other. It may not be safe to go to the police. So they have to really come together in different kinds of ways and be very innovative in how they connect and in how they approach their responses. So Maria Limon, my colleague, works on that grant and works with rural communities around the United States. Prior to that, a grant that recently ended was also developing coordinated community response on college campuses around the country. And so that was very robust work because, as you know, campuses are trying to get all the right people at the table so that they can have a good and effective response to people who are reporting victimization. So that work was with I think 100-something campuses around the country is the far reach of that work. I think that Rita can probably speak a little bit more to the consulting and strategic planning that Barb did around the state and the country for other organizations.
Yeah, thanks, Monica. One of the things that I always admired about Barb was her ability to build collaborations, but also as a trainer and facilitator. She really was incredible at helping people understand the dynamics of group interactions, helping people develop a group concept for decision making, that, you know, almost a group design of what their vision was with strategic planning, with boards, with staff development. It was really one of the, I learned a lot from her over the course of years for her just doing that kind of work, because it was not my forte, the strategic planning piece. But she was really, really good at that. And she did that all over the country, sometimes pro bono for people. And if she got paid for it, she normally funneled that money back into the center's budget. And so, you know, I think that in addition to periodically going to Washington to educate legislators, to doing the work on the campus safety grant that we had for a long time at the center, yeah, all of that was really pretty phenomenal in terms of the impact that it had. And now Maria Limon is continuing that through the rural technical assistant grant work that she's doing. So, you know, we do have some international students, so that the reach has gone beyond the U.S. borders in some respects, but definitely the national impact, not just with students, but with the technical assistance center staff has been able to provide over the 20 plus years. It can't be understated in terms of what it's done to help improve service provision and ability to change culture in this country.
And I would just add a few comments that in the academic circles, Barb was connected in the criminology discipline. Her connections just were so deep and wide. And she was connected through the Office on Violence Against Women, through the Office of Victims of Crime, through the Department of Justice. She was connected just everywhere. Everybody knew her. It was just amazing. She was just amazing. We were all lucky to know her.
Thank you, Angela. I'm trying to follow the chat and questions. It's moving fast, which is great. There's a good conversation going on. I mean, I think sort of a question, you know, the future of the program. I mean, we are absolutely committed, or I am at the School of Public Affairs, to the, you know, the concentration, the certificate, the 4 courses, continuing that, the cohort model. We hope to be able to continue to piggyback the community education programs on top of that. And, you know, we're working with Monica and Maria on the grants from the federal government, the rural work and the K-12 work, and hope to, you know, be able to continue that for quite a while. So you know, while we don't have Barb at the epicenter of all of that, which, you know, she really did piece together over the years, you know, we think that we can continue a lot, if not all of it, and maybe, you know, maybe some new directions as time and things evolve. I would say too is, you know, I've been the dean of the school for 13 years, and it was hard for Barb to continue to bring the money in. You know, as everybody in this field knows, it's not well funded, and, you know, Rita's argument earlier about why it should be better funded is a great one, but you know, it's a tough, it's been tough in the real world. And Barb, you know, was able to get donations, grants, projects, consulting. You know, the school has tried our best to support the center with, you know, the HR and accounting and grants, people that work for the school. But it's hard. I mean, it's hard in any, you know, what we call soft money center to find the money for the work and to keep the work going. So we really appreciate it, all of you in the audience that have supported the center over time, either financially or, you know, with your time and energy. And we do hope to continue to do this great work. A few more questions, and this one I'll start with Ruth maybe, and others could chime in. You know, many of you have been doing this work for a long time, and yet, maybe in the broader scope of human history, it's relatively new work. And, you know, I'm sure it's exciting to see progress, like the Violence Against Women Act, and some of the other things we've talked about. It's probably frustrating to see it continue to be such a big problem. If our goal is to end this violence, you know, that's still a ways off. But what do we need to continue to do to make progress here? And as an aside, how can the center help that? And then in the shorter run, I guess this is many questions together, but how has COVID impacted this? I mean, I think when Barb was in the news a fair amount when COVID first hit, that, people were going to be at home more and fewer escapes or outlets, from the time at home, if that becomes a problem. I'm not sure what the data show, but, I'm curious about how that has affected your work as well. So maybe a few bites at that very big question, Ruth.
I've dissected in my brain all of the bits and parts. So I'll start from the end. I do think that the impact of COVID in regards to victims and survivors and what they've experienced, we won't know the real numbers for a while. What numbers we do have are those that are reporting. And as we all know on this panel, and anyone experienced in the world of domestic violence knows that reporting is not always a good number to look at. I also believe, I don't believe, but I would also have us think about one of the challenges that seems to have gotten lost during this unfriendly pandemic time was the challenges that advocates had to face. And it was because of their need to be and I'm talking advocates, everyone from leaders of domestic violence, community domestic violence programs, to the advocate who's answering hotline calls, who are our constituents and who I certainly have a fond heart for, was the ability to pivot. And I must say to you that I think one of the benefits of doing a program like we did, the Center on Domestic Violence, was understanding the ability to pivot, because you had practical experience from the public administration side, but you also get that information about domestic violence and social issues and all of those kinds of things. So when you need to switch and make things happen, they happen. So the impact of the pandemic and what it meant to advocates, I think answers your first two sets of questions in that nutshell. Is that we do not do enough in this society, and not just talking about domestic violence, but resourcing, funding, and providing some of the things that, for instance, the program authors, the domestic violence program authors, the Concentration on Domestic Violence program authors, to community-based centers in general, to better equip advocates and leaders in the community-based programs to be able to respond to something like this. They're always responding, everything from high-profile domestic violence cases to how do we deal with a shelter program that's got to make adjustments because there's a pandemic. So speaking specifically about the program on domestic violence, I think that it lends all of those tools to everyone, but then also as a larger societal issue and problem. I don't know that we'll ever see enough resources to prevent and assist and provide crisis services and interventions for those who are experiencing domestic violence and their quote unquote helpers.
Great, thank you. Shannon, do you want to take a cut at some pieces of that question?
You'll have to remind me of the pieces. I think I kind of forgot.
There was a lot.
Long term, there's been a lot of progress in this field, right? But still a lot of frustrations. And then COVID, maybe threw in another angle. And so, how do you think about both the optimism of progress here, but also the frustrations that continue in this work?
I think optimism for the future in terms of domestic violence advocacy and prevention revolves around community partnerships and coordinated community response in large part, which I think Barb was definitely excellent at. And the network that exists now to run the PGV program has learned from Barb and has expertise in this area. So I think that's going to be essential, addressing the needs of women of color, survivors, more specifically, both in research and in services, culturally competent services. The challenges, of course, and I echo the other panelists about funding, people, a lack of education in the community about domestic violence, so people unwilling to learn more or not able to learn more. So I think there's a lot of promise. It's just it's going to continue needing the passion that we all have here and fostering it through this wonderful program and working with our communities in our individual states to make change and advocate for the goals, Barb's goals and our goals towards preventing domestic violence.
Thank you, Shannon. Rita, your thoughts on that set of questions?
Well, I think that having hope is critical if you do this work for very long, because it's really hard work. And one of the things that I would like us to think about collectively, both the people that are on this presentation as well as the people that we're connected to in our communities, I'm troubled by the rise in overt glorification of violence right now. The way in which people are encouraging each other to lash out and to call people bad names and to hold people up who engage in violence as somehow people that we should honor or respect. That's not an acceptable strategy in my mind for us to move towards. I know that people are frustrated by the pandemic. I know that there's a lot of financial instability for a lot of people, but we cannot use violence and abuse as a way to solve our problems. And I think that if we can come back to a place where we engage with each other with respect for self and others, and that's our mantra, that's our standard, that's the way we want to work, that will have more success in reducing violence in interpersonal relationships, because we just can't keep egging each other on. This is not an acceptable strategy, and it has nothing to do with funding. It's about how we engage with each other as human beings, and we've got to get back to a place where we do that from at least a place of acceptance, if not a place of actual caring and embracing.
Very profound statement, Rita. As we head up towards 1 o'clock, I'm tempted to just end with that. I'll just add, I know some of you probably in the audience were in attendance for the 20th anniversary celebration of the center. Michael Bolton, the playwright formerly known as Eve Ensler, known as V, was there. It was a great event, and I know we had to move that around a little bit because of COVID and ending up on Zoom. But that's a memory I have, that again, at that point, obviously no one anticipated Barb's sudden and shocking passing this year. But, there is so much good work. I mentioned the center on campus, the Phoenix Center, that will continue, and Barb's legacy is huge in all of these areas, locally, on campus, at the school. With the hundreds of cohort graduates, that we've talked about in the program, and I was so thrilled that two of you were able to be with us today. So those in the audience, thank you for joining us. Please, I saw a lot of connection going on and ideas, and please continue that conversation beyond this 1 hour we have. And we're excited about the next steps with the center, and it's going to be hard without Barb at the core of it, but we think we have some good talent and good training and good legacy people that she produced that will help us do that work well. So thank you all. Have a good weekend, and thanks for being with us.